All right. Welcome, Danny, to Dominate Your Day. What fun I had researching you and hearing about your past and where you are now and your calling for the world and being your authentic self every day. I'd like for you to share with our listeners as we chat today kind of where you've been and what's your story and how you got here, where you are author,
All
speaker,
kinds of hats. Yeah.
coach,
Well, first of
teacher.
all, thank you so much for
Yeah,
having me on, Dana. More importantly, thanks
yeah.
for spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I love your authenticity. I love your brand. If we were going to write an autobiography of me, it would probably be called Pivots because I've lived lots of different lives. Back 30 years ago, I was a journalist. I got to cover President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election. I loved my job, got to meet every editor of every major daily. And one editor offered me a job working the city beat for $16,500 a year. Well, then a friend of mine said, "Hey, Danny, they're hiring
Ooh,
teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year." So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay. And I fell in love with teaching. I've actually taught all age levels from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists and continued working at various schools in South Central. I worked as a professor at the University of Southern California. And then in 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And
oh,
I could focus on the negatives, but
oh,
I'm a positive person. I mean, first of all, my wife is my soulmate. She stuck by me when I put her through the ringer. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, money's no longer the end all be all for me because I learned you can lose it all just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people
mhm.
because if I was somebody looking at what I did, I would have said, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't know everything about a person, you really don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to confess, but the more I read my Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file for
Mm,
bankruptcy. And my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year if you want to avoid bankruptcy. So I started speaking on the side, Dana, and I hit that number right on the
mm.
number. Well, the next year, he gave me a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And so basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in American history, I was able to really build up a very lucrative speaking business, which was rolling along wonderfully until 2020 when a thing called COVID happened. And people asked me, well, how's your speaking business, Danny? I'm like, well, the way
Mhm.
I lost 200 speaking engagements overnight because they just shut down the world, it's great. Well, for years, Dana, people have been asking me to coach them in speaking, and I always resisted because as a teacher, I've always had a very high standard for my students. I actually will not let you fail. I will stay on your back until you succeed. Well, now I work with entrepreneurs and executives who are highly motivated and they do the work. And it's probably the most rewarding experience I've ever had. So that's a very long answer to your short question, but I've gone on many different roads.
No. Well, I think, Danny, I think there's several lessons there. I think a lot of people are afraid of pivots, but when you look back, just like you did, and talk about those pivots, there was always a big lesson learned there. And what I heard that you discovered your authentic self through that. Is that what I heard as a turning point when you started speaking, that it just started growing and it was
Absolutely.
like, oh,
And
this could
the
be
other
my
thing,
sweet
Dana,
spot?
especially when I'm working with clients, the first suggestion I always make to them on how to create a better presentation is stop sharing your successes, start sharing your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed. And the more you reveal your own vulnerability, Brene Brown, she's a wonderful speaker. She talks about the importance of vulnerability. I completely agree with her. The more you
Mhm.
share your own weaknesses, your own fears as you've gone along on your journey, the more you're going to connect with your audience. I mean, not everybody in your audience has climbed Mount Everest, but all of them peed their pants in first grade and were embarrassed. So the more you share those types of stories, the more you're going to connect with your audience.
Mhm. So, how did you manage yourself during those downturns?
Mhm.
You said you're always going to look for the positive side. I'm so glad you're a Christian and found the Lord and found an anchor there. But what are some of the other things that you found, and how did you
Well,
build your
actually, there's,
resilience
not
during
to
that
get
time?
too Christian on anybody. I don't want freaking anybody out, but there's a great story in the Bible, Genesis 50:20, where Jacob has passed away And now all of Joseph's brothers are freaking out. They're like, "Oh, Dad's dead. Now Joseph is going to take his vengeance out on us for us trying to kill uh, Joseph all those years ago." And so they're really swarmy. They go up to Joseph like, "Hey, Joe, um, before Dad died, he said like you're not supposed to take vengeance on all that bad stuff we did to you." And it's one of the nicest moments in the Bible to me is Joseph looks at his brother. He's like, "Oh no, man. Everything you meant for evil, God meant for good." Put another way, one door
Mm,
closes, a better door opens. And so I've been blessed. I always have had
mm,
people encouraging me. My parents were wonderful encouragers. I had teachers that encouraged me. It actually is one of the things that made me passionate about being a teacher because a lot of the students I worked with didn't have those types of positive role models. And it's really important to me. I
mm,
mean, I know the same thing with your background with Southwest Airlines, Dana. I mean, people just want to feel like they're a part of
mhm,
something. They want to feel like they can do it. And that's what I love about this podcast is encouraging people to be their authentic self. I've never, any of my clients, I've never tried to make them like me. In the last book I wrote, Misfits and Crackpots, there's a great story in there about these two women. They're both choreographers, Martha and Agnes. And Agnes has just opened up her third play on Broadway. And the fans seem to like it, but the critics have panned it. And so she confesses to Martha. She says, "You know what? I give up. I think I'm just going to shut down the play." And Martha looks at her. He's like, "You can't do that. You cannot do that. There's only one you. There's never been another you. There never will be another you. And if you shut down this play, you're denying the world this play. Don't let anybody get in your mind, even yourself." And so Martha was Martha Graham, who's considered the mother of modern dance. She won the Kennedy Center Honors. She won Presidential Medal of Freedom. Her friend was Agnes DeMille, who won the same honors, and she became the very first woman to have three concurrent hits on Broadway. And she decided to keep the play open, but she changed the name to Oklahoma.
mm. That's
Thank
a
you.
great story. That's a great story. So, and that's one of your books. Share with the audience kind of your books that you've written and what's been the most meaningful.
Yeah, yeah,
Probably your
yeah.
last one. All right,
Yeah,
you know, or the one you're
when
working
I
on
was
right
teaching middle school,
now.
I was the only teacher in the school that had no tardy students, and the reason was because I always shared a Paul Harvey story at the beginning of class with the kids. You and I were talking; we're still old enough to remember. Paul Harvey passed away a few years ago at the age of 325 years old. I used to listen to him every single day at 12:15 on the radio. He'd say, "I'm Paul Harvey with the rest of the story." And for 5 minutes, you're trying to guess who's he talking about or what's the company or whatever. And my kids, they just love these stories. But the problem with Paul Harvey was a lot of his stories were about like Sears and Roebuck. Well, a kid today doesn't even know what Sears and Roebuck is. And
Mm,
so I wrote the book, Leadership Begins with
mhm.
Motivation. I wrote that book as an homage to Paul Harvey. Um, Here, I'll share. May I share one quick little story with you from the book?
Absolutely. I'm thinking about Paul Harvey, and I'm thinking about, is
Oh
it
yeah,
if
yeah.
a
He's
farmer,
great. I
that
mean,
that
he
ad where he reads,
there's so many. I'm
oh,
telling you, they
just
still
so
have his
just
books in print.
yeah.
They're out of print, but you can get them on Amazon. They're worth their weight in gold. I love them. So here's just a quick one for you. On the morning of January 17th, 1977,
Yeah.
Gary Gilmore, in a plain t shirt, strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Wyden, an advertising executive who co founded the Wyden and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmate's final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. "Trust me on this one," Wyden implored the company's co founder. And the co-founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co-founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co-founded was a shoe company called Nike.
Mm,
And advertising executive Dan Wyden slightly altered death row
mm,
inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, "Let's do it," into the phrase, "Just do it." So those are the kinds of
mm.
stories that I love to share. I just think people need uplifting stories. But after I wrote that book, Dana, I read it and I'm like, huh, completely unintentionally, so many of the stories of white male Americans. And so the latest book that I wrote, which I've actually made a concurring podcast on, is called Misfits and Crackpots. And most of the stories in this book are focused on women, minorities, and international people, because I think people just need to see inspiration from all over the place. I'm just a big fan of anything that lifts you up. I was watching a horrible show on TV the other day called The News, and it totally depressed me because it was nothing but negativity. And I think that most of us, you asked earlier about resilience. I think the way you build resilience is as J.K. Rowling said, don't let the muggles get you down. So keep out all those people. I was actually just telling this to my kids the other day. My son, somebody had discouraged him, said he couldn't do something. I said, when a person tells you you can't do it, what they're saying is, I can't do it.
Mm,
Yeah. So, so
mhm.
you brought so
Yeah,
I
so you brought so I think about your story, and I think about where you've been, as this journalist, and then, as this teacher, and then all of a sudden this speaker, and now you're teaching others to speak. What are some tips that you have found when you're talking to your audience or to your followers about a well-crafted story? And I hear loud and clear the Paul Harvey inspiration, but what are the
Well,
tips that you share with them, that you think would be
yeah, I
helpful
give
for these
tips to
leaders
waiters. I give
listening today?
strategies to my clients. I always tell them words matter. So yeah,
yeah,
so there's two ways you get
absolutely.
better at speaking. First of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I mean, I watch at least 10 speakers a day. I watch politicians. I watch televangelists. I watch comedians. I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. Here, I'll give your audience a ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows. And the reason is when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their time. Now, most people waste their time. They get up there, they're like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody pays attention. But every now and then, a person does an incredible job. So a few years ago, there was a guy by the name of Joe Walker who won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is the Academy Awards. All the important people are in the front of the auditorium, the actors. And you can see none of them care. It's film editing.
Mm,
And Joe Walker gets on stage and he's British and he speaks very slowly and deliberately. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera's scanning the audience. You see people leaning in, like, what's he
mm,
talking about? And he said, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He walks off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting. And this is what I'm helping my clients do is how do we find that story that connects with your audience? So the first way to get better at speaking is to watch lots of speakers. The second way, I've had lots of wonderful mentors throughout my career. One of them was a guy by the name of Jim Rohn. And Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the work. So if you want to
mm,
get better at speaking, it's all in the reps.
mm,
I promise you, Dana, the very first time you
mhm.
did this podcast, you stunk. And the second time you did this podcast, you stunk. But you stunk a
Probably.
little bit less than the first time. Well, now this is a
Mhm,
well oiled machine. You're very comfortable. And the only reason you got comfortable is because you've been doing it again and again. It's just like riding a bicycle. You build up that
mhm.
confidence every time you get on. It's a trainable skill. I mean, most of the people I work with, yes, I've worked with some famous people. I I was just watching a presentation. The guy named everybody he had worked with, and I'm like, I think it was President Bush who told me, and I agree. I hate name droppers. You
Mm,
don't have to impress me that way,
yeah.
but um, the best. Most of the people I work with are really business owners and entrepreneurs. They have a lot of them are terrified of speaking, and I'm just showing them how to create a more engaging presentation so that your audience decides to take that next step with you, whether it's an unpaid next step like subscribe to my podcast or to book a phone call with me. It can be a paid next step like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. Here's the other strategy I wanted to share with your audience. This is probably, besides bragging, this is the second biggest mistake I see in most presentations. And it's this: they provide multiple calls to action. And here's the old teacher in me. So everything
Mm,
has to rhyme. So this is why I always tell my clients choices confuse and cause you to lose. You can only have one single call to action. So, for example, earlier I was on another podcast, and at the end of the podcast, the host she said, "Oh, if you like this podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star rating, you subscribe, and you write a kind review." And I told her when we got off air, I'm like, "You just told your audience to do 3 things. They're not going to do any of them. You got to give them one single
mm,
call to action. And if you
mm,
do that, you're going to have a much higher conversion rate. You got to be very clear about that. And so, my company, Well Crafted Story, workshops with Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer. My background's in academia. Jimmy was a Broadway actor, and Dave is an old attorney, tech guy behind the scenes, like the Wizard of Oz. And what we're doing is working with people on a process we call our 5 C's process. I mean, you can call this peanut butter and jelly. Everybody has their own little terminology, but the 5 C's we believe are vital to a
mhm.
critical presentation. Are, first of all, you need clarity, and this is before you ever write a word of your speech. After you have clarity, then you have to connect with your audience. You teach your content. You have a call to action, and then you have an inspiring close. And if you can fulfill all 5 of those C's, you're doing a great job.
I think that's great. I think one of the things I'm passionate about right now, and we've been speaking about it some, but I really want to bring this out in our discussion is authenticity and how do you connect authentically. Because
Mhm.
everybody's selling something all the time, and it just kind of just noise. It's
Yeah.
like, but how do you bring like that story you just told? You told at least 5 stories already, but
Yeah.
they just came to you so naturally, right? And people, our brain remembers stories. So, what if there's one tip about, I always say,
Hmm.
don't try to be somebody else. They're already taken. Be you, right? So, in working with leaders and working with entrepreneurs, what do you think is the biggest roadblock
Yeah. So a lot of them,
in
the
helping them
very
be their
first
authentic
exercise I
self
always take
and bringing
clients through is, and I'll share this with your audience right now, is later on, get a pen and paper, sit in a comfortable chair with a libation of choice, and for an hour, I want you to make a list of all the stories that have ever happened to you. And I don't mean write the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco,
Mhm,
the time dad spilled mustard on that tie when we went to that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can come up with like 500 of these little stories. That's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is I want you then to think about, well, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about being loyal to others. Oh,
mhm.
this is a story about kindness. And on my computer, I literally have hundreds of files with tens of thousands of stories so that whenever I need a story to connect with my audience based on a certain characteristic, I have stories at my disposal for people. I'll give you an example. We were working with a financial planner, Richard, a few months ago. The, Richard's interesting. The way he gets his clients is twice a week he has these presentations for about 15 married couples in their 50s at a fancy steakhouse, and it's like a free dinner and his 1 hour presentation. And he used to begin his presentation where he says, well, I've been in the business for 30 years. I've made over $1 billion for my clients. I've worked with this famous person and this famous person. And I said, time out, Richard. What are the three most critical elements of real estate? Location, location, location. You can brag, but you're doing it in the wrong part of your presentation. And so we changed his opening. He had revealed to us 30 years ago. He tells this story now about the very first client he ever booked. And it's basically a comedy of errors, Dana. I can't believe this person invested a dime with this guy because he did every wrong thing. And this was the interesting thing Richard noted a couple of weeks later. He got back to Jimmy and me. He's like, you guys are geniuses because of the 15 people, he said usually only about 6 of the couples would call him to set up an appointment to talk about investing with him. And he said that typically the man, the husband, always had his arms crossed during his presentation, like, what's this guy trying to sell me? How much is it? And he says now that he's changed the story, that same guy is patting his knee because he's laughing hysterically, and he's increased the number of phone calls from 6 to 12. I mean, he's able to double them. I'm never going to guarantee you can double them, but that's great. He's gotten a higher conversion rate. The other thing he did to demonstrate his authenticity, we worked on his close, and his close now, it used to be, he used to try to impress people with numbers, statistics, things like that. And of all people, it was Joseph Stalin who said, 1 million people dead is a statistic. 1 person dead is a tragedy. Translation, facts tell, stories sell. And so now the way he ends his presentation is he talks about why he became a financial planner. And the reason was because his uncle, who he idolized, wound up, he didn't have a financial planner. He wound up penniless and died broke. And he made a vow that he wouldn't let other people meet the fate of his uncle. And it's touching the touch points that all of us want to be. I mean, that's what, again, I hate going back to Southwest Airlines, but I love that Herb Kelleher had created an atmosphere where people told those types of stories. It was something to be commended. Um,
Mhm.
just these, what's the
Oh, yeah.
most ridiculous thing you did to serve the customers on your flight today? And that's what Southwest used to be, was everybody used to like flying Southwest because, oh, the flight attendants are fun and the pilot says hi to everybody. And it was just a different type of atmosphere. And that came from the top. This is what I love about working with leaders, because I'm like, no, 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 no. Everything you do, people are paying. It's the same as being a teacher is, kids are watching everything you do. You might
Mhm.
not even notice it. And any
Right,
parent can tell you this is somebody
right.
cuts you off, you say a curse word, and all of a sudden you hear in the back seat the kid saying that curse word again and again. People are watching, and so this really gets into what you were talking about, authenticity. The stage is just going to magnify who you are. If you're a jerk, you're probably. I mean, some people can get away with manipulation.
Mm.
That's where I'm a little bit different than a lot of these people. I, when people work with me, I say there's 3 things you need to know about me. First of all, I'm not going to teach you to talk about the most harrowing, tragic moment of your life, like I see a lot of these coaches do. And there's some reasons why I don't want you to do that. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad things happen to them. I don't think we need to hear another sad story. I think we need more stories of hope. Second of all, what Jimmy and I are coaching our clients to do is to create what we call a well-crafted story. The president would have called it his stump speech. This is a speech that you're delivering again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences. So I always ask my clients, do you really want to talk about the worst moment of your life every single time you get on stage? I mean, I know a guy, he talks about his daughter was murdered. He's given that speech over 1,000 times. I mean, I have no idea how he does that. You got to be stronger than me. There's no way I could do that. And third, this is where people get angry with me. I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you laughing, smiling, happy. I personally believe that there's something admirable in that as my objective. I believe the people that tell the sad stories again and again, by the 20th time they're telling that sad story, now those are crocodile tears and now they're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy, it's actually very effective. But I personally don't want to have to
Right.
take a shower after I get off stage because I just manipulated my audience. There are much more ethical ways to get your audience to want to take the next step with you. And so that I think really differentiates Jimmy and me. Plus, Jimmy's all about stagecraft, and I'm all about, well, there's research. I'm, if you want an opinion, talk to your Aunt Ethel. If you want research, I'm showing you the research behind why you're doing this at different times in your presentation.
Mhm. And for such a time as this, right? I mean, people are looking for, especially we've got 5 generations in the workplace and they all need something different. And even the Gen Z right now, they can spot that
Yeah, I
authenticity
agree.
really
Russell
fast.
Brunson, the owner
And
of
they want,
ClickFunnels, he says something which I really like. He says, it has never been more difficult for marketers to get the first dollar out of clients' pockets, and it's never been easier to get the second dollar. And what he's saying is, we need to build up that trust. It's kind of like your podcast. I mean, uh, I bet you
Mhm.
have people that they listen to your
Yeah.
podcast. They'll come up to you and they'll talk about how you changed their life, and you're looking at them like, this is kind of one way communication. I don't even know who you are, but that's the kind of impact that you're having with people, and you're building
Yeah.
that trust because every episode I learn a little bit more about Dana. I learn from her guests, but I learn a little bit more about her, and I like her. This is kind of what I was talking to a guy the other day, and I was going to share my contacts with him. He's like, "Why would you do that? You're my competition." I'm like, "Well, that's where you and I differ. I have no competition. I just have potential collaborators. The world's a big place. There's plenty of pie for everybody. And you and I, Dana, could teach the exact same thing, but we don't teach it the same way. And maybe my client would be more comfortable
Right.
working with a woman. Why am I going to work with that person? I'd much rather them get a great experience with you and know that, oh, by doing this, I mean, people pay it forward. I mean, people are actually a lot cooler than they're portrayed in the media."
And I think sometimes that inner voice we have that's always telling us, "Oh, you don't do that,
Yeah.
don't say that." And it's like, "No, say that, be that uniqueness, be that unique you, instead of trying to be something else." And so I think that's
Hmm.
where the power is because we're most creative when we're in our authentic self. And we talk about, Clifton Strengths a lot and in our work just because you can use those tools to help you boost you as you're trying to be your authentic self, and know that. So I noticed on your website and in some of your materials, you have your mission statement. And I think that's very powerful. What you're talking about is intentional living, like saying, I want my audience to be hopeful when they leave, when I finish. So what is something about Danny that most people don't know that you'd like to share
Oh gosh.
today as your hopeful self, and that as you're inspiring them and, and encouraging them on their
No, you're
journey in
putting me in the
this
spot.
crazy world we live
Well,
in? What is I love to do
well,
that,
I mean, I do love watching speakers every day. I'm watching them constantly. I'm watching video. I was just giving feedback to a client earlier. But probably my three passions are golf, which I'm not very good at, but I love watching golf. Any sport, actually. I'll watch synchronized swimming and I get excited about it.
Mhm.
Second of all, I travel. I love traveling everywhere. I was actually just in Cuba. I got robbed twice, and people thought, "Wow, that's why I would never travel." I'm like, "That's exactly why I travel. Is it gets you out of your comfort zone." And in order to get
Yeah.
into Cuba, you're not allowed to be a tourist. There's 12 different reasons you can go visit Cuba, and one of the reason that I put down was to support the Cuban people. Well, I can assure you, Dana, I've supported at least two people in Cuba quite well. The two that robbed me. And then third, I'm an avid
Mm.
reader, which is it cracks up my parents. My father's a librarian, and I grew up hating reading. And the only thing I read was TV Guide. But it wasn't until I started teaching in
Oh my
the
gosh.
inner city, and I saw a lot of my kids didn't have the resources I had available to me growing. I mean, I was blessed. I had both of my parents were in the home. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich, but we always had food on the table. And my parents always read to us kids, in front of us kids, and we had plenty of access to reading materials. And I think a lot of people are missing out when they're not reading. I read bad books all the time, but if there's one good anecdote, it's worth my time. I mean, that this is what I was talking about earlier. Is some people, they collect cars or stamps. I collect stories. I'm always looking for those inspirational stories. I was actually reading a book the
Mhm.
other day. It was marketing book, and it was horrible, so boring. But there was one story, it was worth reading the entire book. He was talking about this marketer going around the world looking for the next big thing. So he's in Chile and he's watching these fishermen and they're fishing, and he notices they're putting certain fish into a different bin. And he's like, well, why are you putting those fish in that bin? He's like, well, we're getting paid to fish these fish. But so we put the other fish in this bin. And he noticed they were eating those fish. He's like, well, wait a
Mm.
second. Are you eating those fish because you're not paid to fish for them? They're like, well, yeah, we don't get paid for those fish, but it's actually a tastier fish. And so he's like, may I try? They're like, sure. So he tries it. Oh my gosh, this is so much better than the fish that you're getting paid to catch. What's it called? And the guy said, oh, it's called the bonefish. He's like, the bonefish? That's the worst name I've ever heard. And he thought about it. And so he started marketing it in America, but he changed the name. It's now the best selling fish in America. It's called Chilean sea bass. I love
Oh
that
my
story. I was
gosh,
like, wow,
the
that's
bonefish.
on
I
the
didn't
edge of
know
my
that.
seat. That was great. The rest of the book stunk, but that was a great story.
It Yeah, and I think it's great that you took, a passion of working with the inner city kids, helping them read, and then now you have this reading program. So you're doing some things, to give back in a pretty strong way. As we get ready to close out, Danny, what is one thing that you'd like to make sure our audience hears from you today that you didn't get to share? Is there anything, or anything as we, get ready to say goodbye and share your wisdom with
Well, as a
others?
thank you to you,
Anything that's
Dana, and
coming up
your
for you?
audience for bearing with all my stories, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, guide like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to provide everybody with their own complimentary, uh, uh, well crafted story blueprint. What this is the actual system that we take our clients through on how to create their own well crafted presentation. What this does is it takes the guesswork out of how to put together a much more efficient presentation. And what this means for you is fewer headaches, fewer heartaches, and the knowledge that you're going to really impact your audience and get them to take that next step with you. If you just go to freestoryguide.com, you'll get all that. And I just really want to thank you, Dana, for having me today. I appreciate all that you do. I actually love the podcast because I always get some gems. Tell your guests to provide strategies, not tips. We only tip waiters. We give strategies to leaders. Thank you for all you
That's
do.
right. That's right. Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for what you're doing for the world, and I look forward to continuing our conversation, and anytime you're in Dallas, just give us a ring. So thank you for sharing your story today, and stories, lots of inspirational
Thank you. God
stories.
bless.
So best to you. God bless.